Hello, everybody, and welcome. This is really exciting because this is the first Google Hangout of the Pixel Project's 5th annual International Women's Day edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. It's our 5th anniversary. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 14 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women, to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking, and to help us reveal the first mystery celebrity male role model portrait in our Celebrity Male Role Model Pixel Reveal campaign. Now, I'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser. We have lots and lots of exclusive author goodies to give away. I'll tell you how to get all of that a bit later in the session. If you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, meanwhile, you can go to www.thepixelproject.net. Okay, so for this session, we have really special guests. We have a live discussion and a Q&A session with the fabulous fantasy author, Jo Walton. Jo is Hugo Nebula World Fantasy Award-winning author of 13 novels, 3 poetry collections, 1 short story collection, and 2 SF books. She comes from Wales, but she lives in Montreal, where she says the food and books are much better. And her next novel, Lent, will be out in May this year. Jo has very generously donated some awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have set up as perks for donors on our Read for Pixel Rally Up fundraising page. So Jo has given us 1 signed and personalized copy of a first edition hardcover of Tooth and Nail, and 2 advanced reader copies of Lent, her upcoming novel. Now, nobody has seen this before. And she will also compose a poem for 1 generous donor on a subject of their choice, except for economics. The donor will be emailed a soft copy of the poem and also send a typed and signed hard copy by mail. Now, Jo has very kindly made her goodies available to donors anywhere in the world. So anywhere you are in the world, you can donate and we'll mail it to you. But you better hurry up to donate and get the stuff, because they're all very rare treats, and particularly the offer to write a poem. There's only 1 offer. So once someone snaps it up, it's gonna go, it's gone forever. Now, all funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to end violence against women. So please do give generously. I will be telling you how you can get your hands on all this swag a bit later in the session and how you can donate, so stay tuned for that. But right now, Jo is going to do a reading, and then we'll have a live discussion and Q&A. Now, you who are watching this on YouTube, you can participate in the Q&A session. All you have to do is type your questions on the chat box you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. Now, we have 2 wonderful moderators, Regina and Xiaoxing. They will relay the questions to me. I'll read them out to Jo, and she will answer your questions. Okay, so I'm going to switch it over to Jo. And I think Jo is going to read from her new book, Lent. Nobody has ever heard this chapter before. Hi, Jo. Thanks for being here with us.
Hi. Okay, so I'm reading from Lent. Here is the lovely cover of Lent. This is actually one of the ARCs that I am donating, that I'm reading from. So one of the people who gets this will get the very one that I've read from in this section. Okay.
Awesome.
Right. Okay, and I'm not, this is actually, I'm starting on page 123, but I'm not going to explain anything except that this is a fantasy novel which is set in Renaissance Florence, and we're now in 1496. So, he isn't surprised to see Isabella crossing the square. She sees him and changes her direction to come towards him. Girolamo stays where he is and waits for Isabella, who climbs up and sits a little way away from him, close enough to speak, but not close enough for scandal. He appreciates her tact. She is wearing dark clothes and has her head covered, but her smooth dark hair peeps out at both sides, framing her face. I want to take vows, she says, when they've exchanged greetings. I want to be pure in your pure city. I've been listening to your sermons and reading them too for a long time. I think it would be what Giovanni would have wanted. Girolamo nods. I hoped you might, he says. You have spiritual gifts. You saw the demons that were trying to hurt Angelo. That was the last demon he saw inside the walls of Florence, he realizes with a start. Thank you, she says. Would you speak for me at Santa Lucia? He can feel his eyes widen. A Magdalene order would be more appropriate. I could find a place for you at the Conventite. You would have taken Giovanni at San Marco, she says. I can assure you, I didn't do anything he didn't do. And he did it with others before me, which I did not. If he could confess and be clean of it, surely so can I. It isn't the same for men and women, he stammers. Why not? She asks. Why not? He asks himself. For worldly reasons. Because people wouldn't trust their daughters and widows in a convent that accepted women who were neither virgins nor widows. They would think women like Isabella would be a bad influence. But he could see that she wouldn't, any more than the Count would have been a bad influence at San Marco or Angelo. He would have taken Angelo if he had lived. But men were different. His mind skitters away from the question. He has to force himself to face it. It's been almost 2 years since he died, she says quietly. I've lived respectably and without fleshly yearnings. I could have entered a Dominican convent in Genoa or Siena where no one would have known or questioned. But I didn't want to lie, and I wanted to be here, to be in your ark. Not Santa Lucia, he says. He knows what the old first sister would think. She might accept his word that Isabella was a worthy postulant, but she wouldn't be able to help treating her badly. There is a new house where your gifts could be more valuable. Sister Camilla Rucellai will take you into Santa Caterina. As long as it's in Florence, Isabella says. He prays to St. Dominic and St. Catherine. Heaven sends him no guidance, no warnings. He runs his fingers over the green stone again. Let us go there together now, he says. Camilla Rucellai lives in a house on the Via Cocomero, not far from San Marco. They walk down past Orsan Michele, around the cathedral, past the baptistry and Giotto's bell tower. All the stone is luminous in the autumn sunlight. It's a Dominican tertiary house, he says, as they walk. They call it Santa Caterina because St. Catherine of Siena was a Dominican tertiary, and they share the vows she made. Sister Camilla wants to build a new dedicated monastery on the corner across from San Marco, and she's raising money for that. But for now, it's just her old house. Is she a widow? Isabella asks. It's a reasonable assumption. Many tertiaries are, and it's even more likely as Camilla Rucellai has her own house. Florence is full of little convents like that. He shakes his head. She and her husband dissolved their marriage to take orders. Like Abelard and Eloise, she says, surprising him until he remembers that she was Giovanni's pupil. Yes, I suppose so, he says. But in her case, she was the one who wanted it and had to persuade him. Ridolfo's in the novitiate in San Marco now. She must be very strong-willed, Isabella says. She's the one who predicted that Giovanni would become a Dominican in the time of the lilies, isn't she? That's right. And she's certainly very strong-willed. So she's a prophet? Yes. Her visions are truly from God, but he hesitates. She's not very politic about what she tells everyone. And they tend to be symbolic. For instance, before the papal election, she saw a bull destroying a temple. Clearly a reference to Borgia. She prophesied it aloud, and now everyone knows it. She's hard to control. Talking about her, you sound the way Giovanni said your superiors talked about you, Isabella said. He laughs, surprised. There might be truth in that. They're in front of Santa Caterina. He knocks. Isabella bites her lip, looking suddenly apprehensive. There's a long pause before the door is opened by Sister Elena, who stares at them in astonishment. It's not his regular day to visit. Girolamo is the only man who ever comes here, except for the occasional workman, and he, or rather Brother Tommaso, who takes care of these details, has to give permission for workmen to enter when a tile blows off the roof or the well needs mending. Women do visit here, friends and relatives of the nuns, but he discourages this and tries to minimize it. Once people enter the religious life, it is better for them to truly devote themselves to God and not be distracted by reminders of the world they chose to leave. Thanks be to God, I want to see Sister Camilla, he says. Elena nods, her eyes darting curiously to Isabella. Elena is the widow of a prosperous mason, in her 50s now, with her children grown and settled. She was plump when she came to Santa Caterina, but she's lost flesh fasting, and now the skin of her face looks baggy under her veil. Come in, she says, opening the door wide. They follow her down the hall to the little courtyard in the middle of the building. There is a little orange tree there and a beehive, and rosemary and lavender bushes. The lavender is still blooming and the air is full of its fragrance. Sister Camilla comes down the stone stairs that lead up from the courtyard without being called. She's dressed in black and white with a plain wooden cross around her neck. Behind her glasses, her weak eyes are red-rimmed as usual. Glory to God! I thought you would come today, she says. Did you write it down? Girolamo asks. I did. Good. He turns to Isabella. All the sisters here have special gifts. Sister Camilla, Sister Bartolomea, and Sister Vaggia prophesy. Sister Elena and Sister Anna see demons, as you do. And Sister Beatrice has prophetic dreams. I don't usually see demons. I only have an awareness of their presence. Sometimes I see their shadows, Isabella says. That's more than any of my brothers at San Marco can do, he says. Sister Camilla, I want to speak to you. Sister Elena, could you bring wine to the parlour? She asks. Water for me, he says. He sees all three women take breath to speak, probably to urge him to fast less and take better care of himself. Then they think better of it. He smiles as he and Isabella follow Camilla into the parlour, a room lined with very fine intarsia wood panels in geometric patterns. Oh, it's beautiful, Isabella says. Thank you. My husband's parents had it done, Camilla says. Most of the vanities here we've sold, but these can't be removed without damaging them. And they are beautiful. They sit on the stools that are all the furnishings the room now has. Elena comes in with wine for the women and water for him. And once they've settled themselves, he speaks. Sister Camilla, I want you to consider taking Isabella here among you. He has not decided what to tell her about Isabella's past, but Camilla forestalls him. She lived with Count Pico on the Via Porta Rossa, she objects. Did God tell you that? Isabella asks. Half of Florence knows that, Camilla says dismissively. Isabella seems to shrink. She looks at Girolamo. I accepted the Count at San Marco, and he was guilty no less than Isabella. Confession and penance washes away sin. That's a fundamental sacrament of the Church. Isabella has done that penance. She has spiritual gifts. She can thrive here among you, and she has a dowry to bring. A little more than 1,200 florins, Isabella says quietly. Girolamo had not known the Count had given her so much. A normal dowry for a nun is between 1 and 200, about 10% of a marital dowry. Camilla looks horrified. When God speaks to her, she is very sure. She has managed to negotiate the shoals of her life very neatly, to make the marriage alliance her family insisted on, and yet to end up dissolving her marriage and embracing the spiritual life. She's still in her novitiate, but still tacitly acknowledged as first sister here, and by many people as a prophetess. While she's obedient to Girolamo's authority, often she speaks to him as a colleague and ally on equal terms. But sometimes, underneath it all, you can see the respectable Florentine merchant's daughter peeping out. But she takes off her glasses and rubs her eyes. I know I'm asking you to make a sacrifice. We might understand that Isabella has chosen purity, but some in the world will gossip, and you will suffer. Girolamo, you know, if she's here, no one will want to send their daughters to me, Camilla says. I don't want to be unkind, but I want Santa Caterina to thrive. Ask God about that, he says. She sets down her wine glass, puts her glasses back on and nods once, then she closes her eyes. Isabella draws breath to speak, but Girolamo puts his finger to his lips to hush her, and she subsides. She takes a sip of wine. They wait for a moment. Then Camilla laughs, an irrepressible, bubbling laugh. God moves in mysterious ways, she says. opening her eyes and smiling at Isabella. Who would have thought you would be the sign I have prayed for? What's that? Isabella asks. God and the Holy Virgin will send Santa Caterina 100 women before I die, more than 100 because of you. In place of girls thrust into religion to be out of the way of their family, we will have women, grown women, coming out of their own strong desire to be pure, to live as wailers, to be closer to God. That's what I want, Isabella says. Camilla is beaming. I know, and many of them will be like you, penitent. But who shall cast the first stone? After Brother Girolamo dies, we will be a refuge, a sanctuary, a repository of his ideals and dreams. We will shelter a child queen. Many of our sisters will not have full dowries, but we will accept them because they bring us full hearts. And the work of the house will be painting and illuminating and prophecy. We will walk in the footsteps of Brother Angelico and Brother Girolamo, and my house will last for 400 years. Isabella looks at Girolamo, her face a mixture of delight and apprehension. It's the first I've heard of painting, but I think it's an excellent idea, he says firmly. It will allow you to do God's work and help you to be independent without producing frivolities like silk thread, the way so many convents do. The Holy Virgin showed it to me just now, Camilla says. And you know that it's a true vision? Sure, solid, unquestionable, she quotes him back. He nods. Sometimes it's just a wisp, and sometimes it's unshakable. The details of that sound reliable to me. And when it's not what you think you want, that also makes it more likely to be from God. Don't forget to write it down. 100 women, more than 100, she repeats. She stands and takes Isabella's hands. Sister Isabella must be properly clothed in a postulant's habit, she says to Girolamo reproachfully, as if it was something he had forgotten to see to. I'll leave you to arrange the practical details of her reception, he says. I must get back to San Marco. It's almost time for the twilight prayer. He smiles as he goes. Isabella is where she belongs, and she is breaking a trail for others like her.
Thanks, Jo. That was great. And how exciting to hear a chapter from your new book, some first reveal here in Pixel Project. I just want to point out that, I mean, you couldn't see me because you were reading, but I was rolling my eyes at that point where, basically the sisters were saying, what will people say if we have this girl with us? And it just shows how men and women are sort of, conforming to societal norms, kind of perpetuate stereotypes and, just doesn't move the conversation forward. But I actually have another question about this extract you just read.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning, when the characters were saying it's not the same for men and women, and men are different. And you and I know that men and women are actually not different, but this seems to be a concept that a lot of people seem to struggle with, and a lot of authors as well. Why do you think it's difficult for authors to write men and women as equal, or just to depict women as people? Women are people too.
Oh, women are absolutely people too, yeah. I think some writers have difficulty with it because society has difficulty with it. It's historically, I mean, this is the 15th century, but historically, there has been this belief that men and women are different, and there's particularly been this double standard. And I mean, the problem that she's having there really is the sexual double standard. That she lived with this guy, Giovanni the Count. Mm-hmm. She lived with him without being married to him. He was going to become a monk, and they were going to accept him as a monk, even though he'd had a lot of sexual adventures. And he's a historical character, and this she is too. But so he would have been accepted as a monk without any problem, but they've got this huge problem with her because of this double standard. And I think that we have inherited a lot of things from history, And it's been a very short time that we've considered that women are people, that we've actually been treating men and women as equals. We've got a long way to go on this. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about the female characters that you write about. Your books have plenty of fantastic female protagonists and other characters. Some are resourceful and independent. They go through very interesting journeys of self-discovery, tough journeys. All of them, even those who could be considered submissive, are complex characters. They have agency. They are human and they're flawed, as all humans are. So my first question is, who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
Well, I guess people that I know in the world, and also characters that I've read about. Some of my female characters are definitely inspired by actual people, and some of them are inspired by people in books. In the Just City, I have one character who I essentially I discovered her in a Victorian novel where she was having a really bad time, and I just wanted to rescue her and put her in a better world, in a world where she could have a better time. Yeah, so Maya in the Thessaly books is Ellen May from Charlotte M. Young's The Daisy Chain, and I just rescued her from that book. But then the protagonist of My Real Children, who is the tagline on that book is one woman, two lives, two worlds. Because it's one woman at the beginning of the book, she's in a nursing home and she has Alzheimer's and she can remember two different versions of her own life. So, but anyway, she is inspired by my friend Jill Goodrich, and one version of her life is very similar in some ways to Jill's life. And Jill is somebody of that age and who went to Oxford during the war and was a sort of early feminist in that way, and had some of those same experiences. And she now has Alzheimer's, but she's still a friend. So the idea for that character came directly from a conversation that I had with Jill. But most characters just kind of come to me. But Isabella is interesting because the Count, Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, is a real historical character, and he's this period, he's in the book. And he wanted to become a monk, but historically, he was living with a woman. So Isabella is historical, but we don't know anything about her. She is recorded to history as he was living with a woman. We don't know her name. We don't know her class background. We don't know what education she had. We don't know anything. We don't know what happened to her afterwards. We don't know. I had to make all that up because she's just, a footnote. And in fact, she's just the way that she's treated when people write about Pico is that she's an impediment. She's something that's in the way of him. Yeah, she's an entanglement. But we don't really know who she is or what he did for her. The idea that he gave her a dowry, the idea that she wanted to go into religion herself, the idea that she's spiritually gifted. I made all that up. I had to make up her personality because that doesn't survive.
Yeah, but it's still, these things still happen today because like I was just talking to my colleagues earlier where the Associated Press published an article and the headline said, Stephen King and his wife donate a certain amount of money. And I mean, she has a name. She's a person. She's an author in her own right. It's Tabitha King. But it's still Stephen King and his wife. You know, we still do these things. Yeah.
No, it really happens now, and women just become invisible so easily. And also, I've discovered when I look at any historical period in detail, there are always women there, and they're always important, and people will recognize them. But when the history gets written down, and also particularly when it gets summarized, the women always fall out. So you look at any period and you look at the actual original documents, and there's women there. It was when I discovered a letter from when I was working on the Just City, and I was doing a lot of research about that. And there's a letter from Xenophon, who is a philosopher at the same time as Plato, and he wrote a book about Socrates. And some of his letters survive. And one of them, a philosophical letter about philosophy, is to a woman. And this isn't Plato, who we know that Plato believed that women could do philosophy and that women had souls. Yeah. This isn't Plato. This is Xenophon, who's famous for going on a trek through Persia and coming home again. You know, the women were there. The women were important.
Yeah.
And Plato and Xenophon thought they were. But if you read anything about Greek philosophy, you don't hear anything about the women. The women have just fallen out of the bottom. And it's the same for any period that you look at. When you look at the Renaissance, there were female poets and there were female painters. And they're forever being rediscovered, because when people write the main histories, they don't put them in.
Yeah.
And there's this awful idea that women are supposed to study women, that now we have women's studies, gender studies. Women go into women's studies. They're not important in general history. They're not important to other people as part of actual real history. They go in this little box where we'll talk about clothes and cooking. And it's not that those things aren't important, but they're not the only thing that's important. So,
oh my God, yes, we could go on about this. That would be a whole other hangout with us, Jo. Maybe we should do that. But okay, so let's get back to how you write novels and how you depict female characters. Now, like we were saying, there's a lot of stereotypes and tropes. How do you break stereotypes to create a female character who is, you know, a real person, a really well-rounded person, has agency, can deal with the world around her, but can also deal with situations involving sexism and misogyny and violence against women and girls? Is it difficult to write people like that?
So I don't think it is at this point difficult, or at least I don't think it's difficult for me when you're talking about major central characters. And also, I'm thinking about that. And it's not difficult for me to think about that. It's central. I'm thinking about it. And I'm also thinking about other things like that. But where it becomes a problem that we've got all these stereotypes and things is when you have minor characters. Because you know the saying that when you're writing and you don't know what to have happen next, you should have a man come through the door with a gun. Have you heard that?
Yes, or I've heard people say, oh, yeah, if you don't know what's going to happen next, have a man come through and have sex.
Right, even worse. But the thing with have a man come through the door with a gun, I believe it was Raymond Chandler that said that. And if you don't examine that, why is it a man? Okay, why isn't it a woman coming through the door with a gun? Is it not more interesting already if it's a woman? Right, how old is this man? Is it like a 12-year-old? Is it somebody who's 67? Or is it like your standard 26-year-old man with a gun? What colour is this man? Is this man perhaps in a wheelchair? And once you start asking these questions, it's a much more interesting story when you've got an old woman in a wheelchair coming through the door with a gun. Suddenly you've got a way better story than if you've got James Bond coming through the door with a gun. It's just a cliche.
Yeah.
But unless we think about these things, when it comes to the minor characters and the standard things, we go with the archetypes, the stereotypes, the cliches. And the stereotypes and the cliches are deeply sexist and deeply racist. And we just keep repeating these things because we're going with what society gives us. So you've got to examine it. And I try to do this, but I'm not saying that I succeed all the time. And sometimes when I look at my early work, I will see things and it makes me cringe. And that's good, because it's a sign that not only that I'm paying more attention to stuff, but just how far the world has moved on. In the 19 years that I've been publishing books, we've come a long way on this stuff.
Yeah.
But you just have to keep examining it. And in fact, with this book, with Lent, because a lot of it is set in a monastery in Florence in the 1490s, it's got a male central character. And I actually had a problem that I've never had in my life of being part of the way into the book and realizing I just didn't have enough women. And most of my books just have loads of women. And I just thought, I don't have enough women. And I had to think about it. And I had both of those characters that we saw in that scene, both of the female characters, Isabella and Camilla. Camilla is historical. She is recorded in history as a prophet. She actually started her own monastery, and she kept his memory alive after he died, as she says in that scene. But I'd kind of cringed away from her because a lot of the historians writing about her write about her in a really kind of horrified way, as if she's kind of hysterical. They don't like her. She's like too female, and she's too female and powerful in a weird way. In the way he says she's difficult to control, and then Isabella says, "You sound like your superiors talking about you."
Yeah.
There's that kind of attitude, and I didn't want to have her in the book. And then I thought, no, I'm having her in, and I've got to rethink who she is and what she's doing here. And then I wanted to do then more with other female characters and do it, but I had to consciously do it, because unconsciously I was going with my sources, I was going with culture, and I wasn't having enough women and having it central enough. And that's what we'll do when we don't examine it.
Do you ever feel outside pressure to conform to stereotypes, or have you ever gotten any flack for not making a female character likable enough, for example, or breaking a stereotype?
No, I haven't. But I'm very, very fortunate in my editor.
Okay.
I have an editor who is very much on the same page as me with this stuff. I've never had any problem with female characters like that. I've never had any problem with gay and lesbian characters. My first novel has a asexual protagonist, and I didn't have any pushback at all on that or anything. But I think that if I had an unlikable character, I would have more problem. But I think that's not been a problem.
Okay. We have not a question, but a comment from Regina, who we were talking about how women are historically sort of erased from history. And she says, in traditional Chinese family genealogy or family trees, no daughters, wives, or mothers are ever recorded. So there are no women's names there, only the men.
Oh, whoa.
Where did all these men come from? They just appeared out of nowhere. Okay, so let's move on to a question about a specific character. I wanted to ask you about the character of Sulian. She stands out because when the reader is introduced to her, she's being brutally attacked. Now, she experiences a lot of trauma because of this incident, but she is actually a survivor. She eventually finds her place in the world. She becomes who she's meant to be. And she goes through a really incredible journey throughout all the books. Why did you decide to write a character and a main character with this kind of background?
So, actually, that whole world and the character started from a poem that I wrote. Mm-hmm. And the poem was written to explain what's good about feudalism. And, feudalism is not something that many people are very positive about. But feudalism is way better than what came before it, which is slavery. Okay. So feudalism, actually, everybody is a link in a chain, and the chain is in order, and there are people on the top, and there are people on the bottom. And this is not as good as not having that order, but it's way better than having slaves where you can buy and sell them. Because if society is all linked together, society is all there. Feudalism was progress, okay, socially, at the time. And I was trying to explain this to somebody, and I wrote this poem, which was from the point of view of somebody who was the middle link. And it was a woman, it was Cillian. It was a woman who had been a knight and had a lot of fun fighting. And now she was grown up, and she had to lead other people into battle, and some of them were going to die. But it was a necessary battle that had to be fought, and she was leading them. But the fact that some of them were going to die and she was responsible for them, and the fact that they were going to die, is the bit where the feudalism comes in, and the good thing about feudalism and the responsibility. And I wrote this poem, and it's on my website. It's called 30 Sword, and it's on my website. And I wrote it, and then I thought, wait, when is this supposed to happen? There's never been the period in history that this could have happened, because there were women who fought, but if they wanted to stop fighting, nobody was going to make them go back to it. They could always quit. It was always exceptional that they were doing it. In most European historical societies that I was aware of, and now as well, right up to the Second World War, if there were women who wanted to fight, they mostly would go fight. But if they wanted to quit, nobody was going to say, it's your responsibility to go back and lead other people, you've got to do it, which in my poem she did. So I sort of had this character who had this responsibility and who had fought for fun. And I thought there haven't been, we've had lots of fantasy characters where there are women and they're going out and they're fighting and they've got a sword. But they've always been in this historical frame where they could stop if they wanted to, that I could think of. And I thought, I could do a really interesting sort of world with this. And I had to do a lot of world building to get a world where that would work. And the character just developed out of that. And I deliberately, she is a very serious person. And she has this responsibility, and she's going to do it. And I had her voice because I'd written the poem, and it was all first person poem, and I had it. And I as soon as I started thinking about sex and romance in connection with her, I just thought, no, she's not going there. She doesn't do that. And in some ways, that was to make it easier for me writing a first novel that I didn't have to do that. But in other ways, it was just her. And I had a good friend in university who was asexual. And I am not very romantic myself. I am not. I'm on the spectrum of being aromantic, certainly, and it was very easy for me to write her aromanticism, and to sort of get that right just by exaggerating what I found in myself there that was like that. And also, as I said, stuff with my friend. Also, my friend who is asexual, my friend from university, she's also she's 6 foot tall and she played women's rugby. So when I did a lot of the physical body language for Sulian, I was thinking about her, and also the tennis player Venus Williams.
Yeah.
She's got those shoulders.
Yeah.
So you know, I was, those were my sort of physical models for Sulian. So maybe some of that went in from there. But then I started off with the traumatic attack and doing that because that was where the story started, and it was just where it started. And I was relatively inexperienced, and now sometimes I can go against what the story feels like it wants if I've got a better idea. But then very much I was just going with the flow of where it starts. I had no idea where I was going. I had a strong grip on the character. I knew she would come back leading troops later, which actually happens at the beginning of the second book. But I knew that was going to happen at some point. But I really, really didn't know where I was going, and I did a lot of the research for it as I was writing it. I was making it up as I was going along. I mean, I went back and fixed things.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about if you did any research, and I also another thing that stands out about her is that her trauma sort of does stay with her for a while. The memory of this attack, because even in the beginning when she's introducing herself, she's basically talking. It's her as an older person talking about what happened to her when she was young, and she still says what if and should have, so in a lot of fiction, characters who experience violence, including rape, seem to kind of forget about it almost immediately, or as soon as they get their revenge, or as soon as the male character turns up and saves them and exacts his revenge. So why did you decide to sort of go the other way and show how violence can have really long-lasting effects?
It's not just violence, it's also grief. Because her brother gets killed in that attack.
Yes.
And she never, ever stops missing her brother. And part of that was, it's a reaction to the way that those things get treated in fiction. That you so often see somebody lose somebody or somebody be attacked, and by the beginning of the next chapter they're over it, and the person that they've lost they've forgotten about, or they'll think about them once sentimentally. And that's just not how that works in my experience. And I just wanted to write about that in a realistic way. But I also, there's 2 ways of doing it, okay? 2 standard ways of doing it, and I didn't want to do either one. One is that the character gets over it by the beginning of the next chapter and is forgotten about. The other one is they are scarred forever and they never recover, and they're broken by the experience. And I didn't want to do that either, because I don't think either of those are true. Are true to life and to my experience and to other people's experience that I'm familiar with. I think that people do get over it, but they're not the same, but they can be great people, but different people. And they can heal, they can recover, but not in that easy way that you get, that slick way that you get. But they're also not sort of necessarily broken by it, or if they are broken, it's like a branch breaking off a tree, but the tree is still there, and the tree will grow new, different branches and do different things. And that is actually a theme in a lot of my work. It's one of the things that, among others, is about. Among others, the main character in Among Others has lost her sister before the beginning of the book, and she never gets over it, but she also isn't broken. So the ways that people deal with traumatic stuff, and also what happens after, is just something that I'm interested in. And I think there's a lot of lazy writing in the world where people will write things because that's the way you write them. So whether it's sort of violence or whether it's recovery or whatever it is, there's a sort of lazy, easy way of doing it that people do, which often isn't sort of isn't interesting to write. And I'm more interested in writing things in other ways. Bullying is another one of those things. We've got a standard narrative that you can write for bullying, and I don't think that's interesting. I'm done with that.
Do you think it takes a certain amount of bravery, perhaps, for an author to sort of break away from this and try something new, not knowing whether it'd be well received or not?
I suppose so, but I don't know. I don't think I could write it in the standard way, because I would get bored with it and it wouldn't work for me.
Yeah.
I would just stall out on something if I was trying to do it. And sometimes I find if I'm stuck with a book, which is usually I'll be in the middle of a book and I will get stuck. If I get stuck on it, sometimes the reason I'll be stuck on it is that I've been assuming that I should write it in some kind of standard way that is a standard way of doing it, which isn't going to work. And the reason it isn't going to work is because it's not true. And it's not true to the book, and it's not true to life, and it's not. And when I think it through, the person coming through the door with a gun, that once I get the idea that it's a old woman in a wheelchair with a gun under the blanket on her lap, that is, suddenly I can write it again and I won't be stuck. I've never actually done that scene, but you know.
So if we ever do see that scene, we know what happened. Okay, so continuing with this questions about violence. There are quite a few incidences throughout all your books that depict violence against women in different forms. Let me just give you one example. In Tooth and Claw, Solyndra is accosted by Parson Felt, whose intention is clearly to compromise her so that she will be forced to marry him. Basically, she'd have to marry her rapist. It was a really difficult scene to write, but it happens all the time. It was very difficult to read, but these things happen all the time. So, okay, so my first question is particular to that. Why did you depict this kind of violence in your stories, even in those stories that can be considered a sentimental Victorian novel? And why juxtapose it then with correct, respectful behavior, or even an alternative storyline such as in My Real Children, where different choices are made?
So the reason I put that specific scene in with Solyndra in Tooth and Claw is that Anthony Trollope, when writing his Victorian novels, seemed to believe that women literally did what dragons do in those books, that they fixate on the first person that they connect, the first man that they connect with in a romantic way, and they are fixated on them forever, like a Lawrence duckling. Okay, that they can't ever change and love somebody else, no matter what. But men can, because he was running from his own experience there. But he truly seemed to believe that women were like that. And I thought one of the inspirations of Tooth and Claw was thinking, well, what if I wrote about dragons and I made them biologically like that, where they literally change color? And then I needed a way to introduce that. And also in these Victorian novels, you have unwanted suitors in that exact way. And if you think about Pride and Prejudice, because that's the example that everybody's familiar with, poor old Charlotte Lucas even actually marries him.
Yes.
But that horrible scene where Elizabeth is trying to say no and he's refusing to hear no.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so it was that. I thought that is a scene that you get in Victorian novels where, yeah, he's trying to force her scales to change color by getting too close to her. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I guess the reason that I want to mirror that with respectful relationships, which I certainly do in that book, and also with the two lives in My Real Children, is that I would also like to model better forms of relationships, so that I will highlight the sort of bad thing, but I would like to model a better kind as well, to contrast with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what you would like. I mean, you have a lot of young readers as well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
What would you like young people who read your books to take away from these interactions? The interaction such as Selendra and Parson felt, where he's trying to compromise her, and then her other suitor, Cher, who is very respectful, gives her space emotionally and physically. So, do you sort of have a message for young people?
Well, I think there's certainly an applicable message there.
Yeah.
If people want to take that message.
Do you think
I don't think about what message inserting the message, but it's certainly there, and I certainly want it to be positive.
Do you think reframing how stories describe men, like reframing away from hostile and toxic stereotypes towards complexity, perhaps vulnerability, can be one way in which science fiction fantasy writers can break away from all these toxic tropes that promote toxic masculinity and perhaps the dehumanization of women?
Yes, I absolutely agree that is a thing you can do, and that is, in fact, a thing that I was very much working with in Lent, in my male character there, who is a monk, and is very much not, the toxic masculinity kind of stereotype. I also have tried to write men learning better stories where I've got a character in the Just City. I've got this actually with the god Apollo learning better. It's God learns lesson is the plot of that book. But if you know the mythological stories about Apollo, there's Apollo trying to rape Daphne, and she turns into a tree. And that book starts off with that. And he's like, why did she turn into a tree? I don't get it. Why did she turn into a tree? And the book actually starts with Apollo going around asking Artemis first and then Athena, why did she turn into a tree? I really want to know. I don't get it. And the book, his point of view throughout the book is the process of him getting it, of why she would turn into a tree, because he just did not understand. He thought it was all a game. And so figuring it out from cluelessness, well-meaning cluelessness, is a thing that I was sort of trying to do there. And I think that's another way that you can approach that. But yeah, good examples are definitely a good thing, and that is something that I'm interested in doing.
You were talking about how you don't really think about the message when you write, but do you, in your opinion, now, so stories are a powerful way to bring about cultural change, like the story about Apollo. In your opinion, how do you think authors can strike a balance in their storytelling between raising awareness about violence against women, and creating change and telling a story without being pedantic or preachy?
Yeah, I think that the story has to be central, but I think that we don't have to go with the cliches when we're telling the story. So as long as we don't go with the stereotypes, but we put the story first, then I think you can tell different kinds of stories and stories that are valuable in those kinds of ways.
Now, your stories definitely pass the Bechdel test. It's where women talk about something other than men. So they have complex and interesting relationships between the women. But why do you think that a lot of science fiction and fantasy authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test? I mean, despite there's many more things that women talk about than men. And
Absolutely.
do you have anything to suggest to writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
Just to remember to do it. Just to remember that this is an important thing and that women talk about things that aren't men. If you've just got that in your mind, and often, even if you've gone with the stereotypes, even if you've gone with the cultural stereotypes, when you're revising, you can just sort of hit yourself on the head and think, duh, and then change it,
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons people have problems with this is that when people first started within genre, within science fiction and fantasy, when people first started to write powerful female characters, they had this idea that they had to be kick-ass female characters. And so that they were very much sort of reversed action heroes. They were female action hero characters.
Men with breath.
And you'd have, right, well, but it's better to have that than not to have it, okay? It's better to have that than only to have the mad scientist's beautiful daughter. It's much better to have that. But you were getting that. So you'd have these kind of reversed characters and you'll have your cliche character, but they'll make it female. And even if they've thought through that one character, and I can think of loads of books like this, you'll have a female central character who is great at, piloting spaceships and shooting, or great with a sword, and all the other female characters are barely on the page, and they're just there to be rewards in this most cliched way, that they won't have thought that through at all. But because they've got this one character, they get points. I mean, they do get points, but just having that one character. And sometimes you'll see somebody who's really trying. They're really trying, but it's really clunky. And they don't know how to do it, but they really are pushing the boat out on trying. And you've got to, that's when you've got to think, well, what year was this? What year did they do this? Because if somebody was really trying in 1976, that's better than if they're really trying in 2016,
Yeah.
But I think that it is, a lot of the problem is people just going with the story, just going with what is easy. And if you do that, you will just fall into these same pits that the story's there, because story will roll downhill into all of these expected ways. And often you're trying to push it uphill if you're trying to do something different. And it's not just sexism and misogyny and toxic masculinity. There's also all of these other things like racism and GLBT issues that you've sort of got to be thinking about. And sometimes you'll be thinking so hard about one thing that you'll forget another huge thing, that you'll be doing terribly on this other thing. And when I say you, I mean me.
Okay. But do you think that it's important for authors, for influential authors such as yourself, who are read all over the world, to make a conscious effort to include characters in your stories that show readers the importance of respecting women as equals and as human beings, and of respecting everyone, really.
Yes. Yes, I think it's important, but it's something that I don't generally find difficult. It is something that is very, very natural for me to do in the kinds of stories that I want to tell because I'm the person that I am. But yeah, I do think it's important. I think examples are important.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about geek culture in general. So, including science fiction and fantasy, this culture has had its share of critics, saying that it's still too male dominated, despite there being a lot of prominent and well respected and well known female authors. There's still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's gaming, books, or comics, or whatever, more welcoming for women and girls?
I don't know much about comics and gaming. That's not something that I really can address reasonably. I think generally more representation and again more awareness, just more welcoming awareness helps there generally. And also not letting the older women fall out. Because you know what I was saying about historically the women fallout? I'm seeing this within science fiction and fantasy. There are female writers who were writing in the 70s and 80s, and some of them are dead and some of them are still around. But they are not getting the respect. Their names don't come up in the lists. I am seeing them start to get that fallout process. And one of them is a writer that I absolutely love, one of my very, very favorite writers, which is C.J. Cherryh. And she won a Hugo for Down Below Station in I think it was 82, might have been 83. And she won a Hugo for Citing indefinitely 88, 88, 89. And she hasn't won any Hugos since then, but she's been writing books. She's written a book nearly every year. And she's still publishing and she's still writing. But when people are talking about the great writers of the 80s, she is not coming up, right? Yeah. And she was fairly recently made a Grand Master by the Science Fiction Writers of America, which is good, you know, and gives visibility. But it is important that we don't forget the women writers, or we don't let them fall out, that we keep their work in print, that we keep it in our minds, and that we mention them when we are talking about who's there. And not just one. I mean, I love Ursula Le Guin. I mean, Ursula Le Guin is one of the greatest writers ever, but she shouldn't be the only one on the syllabus. She shouldn't be the only woman in a list of men's names when you're talking about important writers, because there are other important writers too. And we're very much inclined to this sort of token thing, that there'll either be no women or there'll just be one, and there should be more. So just thinking about that and just keeping that in mind is helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, we are in danger of forgetting our female writers. So now I have a question for you as a parent. That you're a parent.
Yes.
You have a son. What do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations? And how do we get boys involved in helping to do so?
So my son is now 28, and he absorbed feminism so completely that it was invisible to him. And he wasn't really aware, consciously aware. So he would say, well, obviously women are people. Obviously, this is obvious, duh. And it wasn't actually until he went to work and he ran into some toxic men that he realized that this actually was still a problem and that it hadn't already been solved. That this was still a live issue, which is clearly an error in my parenting. But I don't know quite what I should have done to bring it home to him sooner.
I guess it's not a fault, I guess, but you brought him up that way and he thought the world is like this. It's a good way to be, don't you think? If only everyone was like that.
Yeah. And I know a lot of men who are like that. My most all my friends, they wouldn't be friends if they weren't,
Yeah.
But then you'll run into somebody, and I never find it goes very long before I run into somebody who's a jerk, and that reminds me that I don't live in that world. Because there's enough people out there. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So believe it or not, we've been talking for more than an hour.
Wow.
So I'm going to ask you my last question. Jo, you have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Could you just tell us, why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors can do to help bring about this cultural change that is needed to eradicate violence against women?
Well, I feel like sort of saying duh again, because of course I support it, of course. And you're doing a great job here and sort of worldwide, and it's very important. So of course I support it. And it's like, am I in favor of kicking kittens? Of course I'm not. It's sort of one of those questions. And I think authors can do various things. They can explore it in their work in different ways, which I have tried to do. I do it in the Thessaly books. You can just be aware of stuff and think about things in better, more positive ways, and just try to. And also, Mary Robinette Kowal said that she wasn't adding diversity for the sake of diversity. She was removing homogeneity to make it more interesting and realistic. Okay.
Yeah.
And there's a certain amount of that. When you try to write about something in a more realistic and less cliched way, you're writing a more interesting story. It's a better story for not going down the well-worn groove.
Mm-hmm.
It might be harder and more work, but it's a better story that you're coming up with. So I think that it's better for writers as well as trying to make the world better.
Yeah, and it's better for readers to read things that are interesting and different. You don't want to read the same thing over and over again and see the same people. You want to see people who are different perspectives. Yeah. So okay, so exactly. That brings us to the end of our session. So
I'll pick the book up again so you can see this great cover.
Yeah. So that's one of the books. That exact book that Jo has held in her hand is going to be given away. Now let me tell you, I'll switch the screen back. Hi, everyone. Let me tell you again what Jo has donated very generously. So there is one signed and personalized copy of a first edition hardcover copy of Tooth and Nail, and 2 advanced readers' copies of Lent, her upcoming novel, including that one you saw just now that she held in her hand. And oh, wait, let me switch it back. Oh, here it is. She's holding the other one in her hand too. So you're going to get, somebody's going to get this book, Tooth and Claw, and the other book, Lent, plus another one, 2 copies of Lent. And the third thing that she's donated is she's composing a poem for one generous donor on a subject of their choice, except for economics. And this donor will be emailed a soft copy of the poem and sent a hard copy, a typed hard copy, which is going to be signed. So Jo has made this available all over the world. So please do hurry up and go and get them, because they're very rare. There's only, not very many going to be up there. And we also have, besides Jo's swag, we also have stuff from other authors such as Mary Sangiovanni, Tananarive Dew, Victoria Dahl, Fran Wild, so many more. And we're going to be releasing new goodies every week throughout March as the campaign gets underway. So now I am going to share with you a little slide. There you go. And all you have to do is to go to our Rally Up page. The link is there, and our moderators are going to post the link in the chat box as well, so it'll be easy for you to just click on the link. It's R4P Rally Up IWD 2019, and you can check out all the author goodies there. If you want to learn more about our Read for Pixels sessions that are coming up, go to bit.ly/r Read for Pixels, and the whole list is there. Please do check it out. Please do give generously. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And if you want to know more about the Pixel Project, our celebrity male role model Pixel Reveal campaign about violence against women, about what you can do to help to end it, please do go to our website, thepixelproject.net. So I think that's it from me and from Jo. Here's Jo again. So I just want to say thank you, Jo. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you for great questions. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to kick off your appeal for this year.
It's an honor to have you, and we were so excited, and it was a really great discussion. Thank you for sharing your views with us. So thank you, everybody, and see you at the next session. I'll say goodbye to everyone around the world. Bye.